1 Corinthians 7 in verse 1, where it says, "Now concerning the matters about which you wrote, it is good for a man not to have sexual relations with a woman, but because of the temptation to sexual immorality, each man should have his own wife, and each woman her own husband. The husband should give to his wife her conjugal rights, and likewise the wife to her husband. For the wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. Likewise, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. Do not deprive one another, except perhaps by agreement for a limited time, that you may devote yourselves to prayer, but then come together again so that Satan may not tempt you because of your lack of self-control." So this will be our main text this morning. We do have another one in Matthew that we're going to look at in a moment. So really there's two main texts today. And we normally have a family gathering, all the kids in, but some of the content today I wasn't comfortable with talking about to the kids, and want parents of kids to be able to control what content they have in here. And so there was rhyme to that madness here this morning. But this morning, God is pro-sex. God isn't anti-sex. God made sex. Sex was made for procreation and for pleasure within the marriage covenant between one man and one woman. And there's been all kinds of abuses of sex, but sex, along with everything else, was created by God and was declared to be good. And this is an important thing to point out, because in some churches or in some religious backgrounds, in order to, out of fear of what our kids might grow up to do, it was almost like this, sex is bad and it's this terrible thing. And that's just a terrible way to talk about it. No, sex is a good thing. It's meant for good. Now, in this historic context, in 1 Corinthians 7, I got to give you some wild context to this, of the culture that they're in, that the church is in. So wives had basically no marital rights in this Roman culture that they're in. They were expected to be sexually faithful to their husbands and to raise the children, but if was found acceptable and normal for the husband to have sexual escapades elsewhere, down at the brothel, or if he can find a prostitute somewhere else, or with one of their slaves, female or male. Okay, this is all found acceptable. Your wife isn't for pleasure, your wife's for kids and raising the kids. Go find your sexual pleasure wherever you might find it. Yeah, isn't that lovely? So culturally, this is what's crazy, just so you understand, everyone is at different cultures, different times, people justify different things at different times. And for them at that time, they would mock someone if they did this in excess. They wouldn't mock them for doing it, because all the guys were doing it. It was like, man, you know how often he goes down to the brothel? It wasn't like that he went there. It's like, man, he goes there more than I do. Like, that guy's crazy. In other words, they actually had a saying, and really, they viewed it, if someone did it a lot, they just viewed him as a glutton, like someone who ate too much. So they viewed sex to be on par with eating food. They just saw it as that type of a transaction occurring. And so, yeah, you shouldn't eat too much food. You shouldn't have too much sex with a whole bunch of other people. Just, in moderation, that's okay. That was the idea. They viewed sex as eating food when hungry, and some people eat too much. But generally speaking, they found it totally fine for a husband to find sexual pleasure outside of marriage. So simply put, the wife sexually belonged to her husband, but his body did not sexually belong to her. In other words, she's locked in with him exclusively, but he's not locked in with her exclusively. This is the culture that Paul's writing to. This is a wild culture. And he dealt with a lot of sexual sin in the Corinthian church. He's like, no, listen. In fact, he's like, you're doing some stuff even they wouldn't do, which we won't get, that's a whole other part. But he deals with, this is the context of what he's writing it in. So Paul really in this text teaches three radical things about sex that were countercultural. Some people have said this is the early Christian sexual revolution right here in comparison to their culture. He said three things. First, husbands, only have sex with your wife. Remember, the context is, hey, wherever you can find pleasure, just don't do it in excess. That's what's acceptable. He says, no, no, no. It's good for a man not to have sexual relations with a woman except for in the confines of marriage. Husbands, only have sex with your wife. Number 2, he taught that a husband sexually belongs to his wife, not just the other way around. He starts with saying, oh, by the way, her body is yours, and they all went, of course. And he said, oh, and by the way, your body is hers. Huh? That would be new information to them culturally. Oh, okay, I didn't. So it's mutually exclusive. So I'm hers, she is mine, and it's nowhere else. Okay, this is new information. So both these things are radical to the culture. And number 3, he also taught that in your marriage, don't go through long periods without having sex. Now, this even makes more sense when understanding that the culture was all about the husband going to find pleasure somewhere else. Sorry, something was falling out of the sky there. And he's saying, no, don't go do that. Always and regularly find fulfillment with each other in marriage. And so it would have been normal, sadly, for his wife to who knows how long between their times being together because he's going and finding pleasure anywhere else. He goes, no, that should always be with your spouse. So these are 3 radical things that Paul taught in a culture that just viewed sex as a commodity for men. It's a commodity that you go and take. But the Bible has a completely different sexual ethic. Sex is meant to be a physical, intimate renewal of a marriage covenant. Sex is saying, I will be naked and vulnerable with you because I've covenanted before God with you to be vulnerable and transparent with everything in our life together. Sex in marriage continues to draw a husband and wife together. Sex is meant to be the giving of yourself to please your spouse. Once again, it's not about taking, it's about mutual giving to the other. Sam Alberry wrote this, marriage is meant to be the means by which we promise to give ourselves to someone else fully and exclusively, vowing whole life commitment to the other. That sex is meant to be both an expression and means of. Now, usually the absence of sex in marriage usually reveals an underlying problem. Now, there's exceptions to that, of course. Past trauma, age, medical condition, etc. But the ongoing absence of sex in marriage is usually revealing unresolved conflict in your marriage, which is kind of a nice built-in thing into a marriage. All right? Because it's difficult to be intimate with someone physically if there's a lack of intimacy and transparency in other areas of your life. You're going to notice pretty quickly. A marriage is likely not suffering simply because of a lack of sex, but a marriage that has a lack of sex is probably because the marriage is suffering. Sex is for marriage, and it's not to be used as a bartering tool or as a bribe. It's meant to be a reflection and renewal of a healthy marriage. With all of that in mind this morning, I realize God created us as sexual beings, and we know biblically that it's for the unique purposes within marriage, but we do live in a fallen world. And so we don't naturally, we're not naturally reserving sexual activity for marriage, for the marriage covenant. All of us are tempted in a variety of ways when it comes to sex. But temptation is not a sin. But to indulge in that temptation, even just in the mind, Jesus says, is a sin. Matthew 5:27-28, Jesus said, you've heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart. See, noticing that someone is sexually attractive to you very well may be just a temptation. And that temptation might not be sin. However, from temptation to sin is a very thin line, is what I'd like to say. It's a very thin line. In fact, sexual perversion, I think, is so prevalent in our culture. And I've talked to some other guys about this before. It's like they don't even know the difference between temptation and lust. Because it just goes right to lust. There's not even a temptation phase. It's like, oh, this goes straight to lust so quickly. It's like, wow, it's just like you're so used to it, you've already given up. In other words, you've already pre-decided. If someone is sexually attractive, I'm going to lust. It's like a pre-deciding thing. But for the believer, we're meant to fight against that and be like, no, hold on a second. This is a temptation. I don't have to lust. This is a choice being made. Why would I give up on such a thing? See, the moment we entertain a sexual temptation in our mind, we're sinning against God, we're objectifying an image bearer of God, and harming the framework of our own mind. You see, within the Christian sexual ethic, it's not just about what you do with your body, it's about how you use your eyes. It's about how you use your mind. And as I mentioned, it doesn't just dishonor God and affect you. It's an offense against the person you're lusting after, even if they never knew you did. It's like, well, what? I didn't do anything. I didn't try seducing them, or I didn't do anything inappropriate. But you didn't hear. Once again, Sam Alberry put it this way: the person being looked at has a sexual dignity that matters so much to Jesus that it mustn't be compromised, even in the privacy of someone else's mind. So people are valuable. And we shouldn't play games in our mind. Once again, there's a difference between temptation and sin. But when it comes to sexual sin, the line usually is really thin. It shouldn't be. It should be a really distinct line of being able to recognize that you're being attracted, or in a tempestuous kind of way attracted to someone, versus lusting in the mind. Well, we're going to look at another text, Matthew chapter 19. Matthew 19, which is normally a place you'd go to talk about divorce, but there's actually, the context here is important. Matthew 19, verse 3 says, "And Pharisees came up to him and tested him by saying, 'Is it lawful to divorce one's wife for any cause?'" They're asking that because in their culture, you could divorce your wife for any cause. In our culture, we've also have now made it to where divorce is for no-fault divorce. You can be for any reason. It doesn't have to be for a particular reason by law. Can we do it for any reason, any cause? He answered, "Have you not read that he who created them from the beginning made them male and female, and said, therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh? So they're no longer two, but one flesh. What therefore God has joined together, let not man separate." They said to him, "Why then did Moses command one to get a certificate of divorce and to send her away?" He said to them, "Because of your hardness of heart, Moses allowed you to divorce your wives, but from the beginning it was not so. And I say to you, whoever divorces his wife except for sexual immorality and marries another commits adultery." The disciples said to him, "If such is the case of a man with his wife, it's better not to marry." But he said to them, "Not everyone can receive this saying, but only those to whom it is given. For there are eunuchs who have been so from birth, and there are eunuchs who have been made eunuchs by men, and there are eunuchs who have made themselves," or you could also render this, "who live as eunuchs, for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. Let the one who's able to receive this, receive it." So once again, let's look at a cultural moment. So there were Jewish men who would divorce their wife and then marry another woman just so they could have sex and be married. Well, that was my wife. Knowing that they were just going to turn right around and divorce her, and maybe even go back and marry the original wife. So basically it was a way in their mind to justify a one-night stand, to live just like the Romans are. It's like, yeah, I would never go hire a prostitute. Oh no, I would never have a sex slave. Oh, I would never do these things, but I would divorce my wife so I could go have sex with somebody else. I mean, this is literally what they're asking. Can I divorce her for any reason? And the reason they're thinking of, can I divorce her so I can have sex with somebody else? That is the context of the question. And Jesus makes it clear. Using divorce to justify a one-night stand is still adultery. He's like, if you're divorcing a spouse just so you can have sex with somebody else, that's adultery. So Jesus is teaching the exclusiveness of marriage. It's meant to be one man committed to one woman, and likewise one woman committed to one man. And to divorce someone just because you want to have sex with someone else is just as immoral as cheating on your spouse without being divorced. So the disciples are kind of shocked at this teaching. What do you say? You saying we can't get divorced for any reason at all? Just whatever we want? Wow, that's a hard teaching, Jesus. You want us to be exclusive with our wives until death? Unless she cheats on us or something? That's a tough teaching, Jesus. For them culturally, that seemed, okay, maybe it is hard for you to understand this. Maybe it is hard for you to accept this. Jesus says, you're right. Some people have a hard time with this teaching. But if you remain unmarried, then you should remain celibate. So, for the Christian, for the one who claims to be a follower of Jesus, when it comes to marriage and sex, Jesus is really offering two paths. Marriage or celibacy. Those are the two paths he offers. One path, marriage between one man and one woman, where you're to freely give yourselves to one another sexually. The other path is to remain single while abstaining from sexual activity. But these are the only two Christian choices when it comes to marriage and sex. Sexual lust towards someone who's not your spouse is sin. Watching pornography is sin. Sexual activity outside of marriage between one man and one woman is sin. Now, if we're honest, in one way or another, all of us have been sexual sinners. We've all fallen short of Jesus' sexual ethic. As adults, it's affected all of us. In Jesus' sex ethic, no one's being singled out. We're all included. So he's saying no matter what temptation you faced, and no matter what temptations you've given up to, here's what I'm calling you to. Here is the Christian sex ethic that I'm calling you to, regardless of what you've been tempted with or are tempted with, regardless of what you have done or haven't done. Here is what I'm calling you to. We've all been or are being or will be tempted in some way to some degree with sexual sin. It's pretty much a guarantee. But it's not the particular temptation that's sinful. It's what you do with that temptation that matters. It's been said, and I love this quote, birds are going to fly over your head. But you don't have to let them make a nest in your hair. Simple quote. If you live in this life and a bird at some point is going to fly over your head, hopefully it doesn't poop on you. Has anyone ever had that happen? You've had that happen? Oh, man. I've had it happen.
On my burger. I was at the zoo.
On your food?
On the burger.
That's gross. I got in my car one time, had the window down, I put my arm out, and then right on my arm and on the side of the car. So birds will fly over your head. But you don't have to let them make a nest in your hair. So we will more than likely all be sexually tempted. But you don't have to let those sexual temptations own you and force you into anything. So no matter anyone's sexual mistakes of the past, in Jesus there's forgiveness, and those past sins don't define who you are. They don't define who I am. We're a child of God. We are loved. And no matter the type of sexual temptation that you face, if you're in Jesus and if you keep in step with the Holy Spirit, He will enable you to escape sin. And we love you. And we need people to walk alongside us, and we want to walk alongside of you together when it comes to all temptation. 1 Corinthians 10:13 says, no temptation has overcome you that is not common to man. God is faithful, and He will not let you be tempted beyond your ability, but with the temptation, He will also provide the way of escape that you may be able to endure it. But let me be crystal clear. Sometimes we're trying to say something, and because we didn't just straight up say it, and I think I've already said it a couple times this morning, and I said it in this series a couple of times, but I'll say it one more time to be crystal clear. Because we love God, and because we love you, the only sexual activity that gospel community will affirm is that of sex within a marriage between one man and one woman. To engage in or approve of any other sexual activity is to sin against God, to sin against others, and to sin against your own body. 1 Corinthians 6 says, flee from sexual immorality. Every other sin a person commits is outside the body, but the sexually immoral person sins against his own body. Or do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit within you, whom you have from God? You're not your own, you were bought with a price, so glorify God in your body. Ephesians 5:3 says, but sexual immorality should not be heard of among you. 1 Thessalonians 4 through 5 says, this is the will of God, your sanctification, that you abstain from sexual immorality, that each one of you know how to control his own body in holiness and honor, not in the passion of lust. 1 Corinthians 10:8 says, we must not indulge in sexual immorality. Colossians 3:5 says, put to death your sexual immorality. Now this word, we said it over and over again, sexual immorality. It comes from this Greek word that is porneia. Any idea what that word's connected to? Okay, this is literally where they get the word pornography from. Porneia. And it simply means any form of sexual activity outside of a marriage covenant between one man and a woman. It's a catch-all word that catches any other type of sex outside of God's design for it. That would include premarital sex, adultery, homosexual sex, prostitution, bestiality, sexual fantasy, and any other type of sexual activity outside of marriage. Now, being tempted by sexual desires is real. Would never pretend like it isn't. But so is what God says. And as a Christian, it's not just about getting our ticket punched for heaven. It's about total transformation for His glory and for our good. And that includes putting to death all sexual sin in our lives. So yes, as Christians, as a church, we won't hold people's past against them. We won't hold anyone's particular temptation against them. But we'll never endorse or approve any type of sexual activity outside of God's plan for marriage. We love God and we love our neighbors too much to lower God's word. Temptation of sexual cravings and desires does not define any of us as a person. It doesn't define anyone in the world. People are so much more than their sexuality. If someone is not a Christian, I don't expect them to just automatically understand that. See, there's this illustration I heard that's marvelous. There's a quote. It goes something like, seeing the dancer dance and not hearing the music, you'd think the dancer is crazy. It's like they're not dancing. I see them dancing, but there's no music. They're moving like, what? And that's what it's like sometimes when people look at Christians. It's like, I don't understand the dance that you're doing. And it's like, well, you don't hear the music. And our music is Jesus and His Word. And so I don't expect people to hear the music and to understand. I'm not putting that on anybody to understand that. But as a follower of Jesus, regardless of how we feel, whether it's sexual temptation or any sin for that matter, we can trust Jesus. We can trust Jesus. He knows us better and knows what's better for us than we could ever know ourselves. Don't believe the lies. This applies to all of us in this room and to everybody. You are not your sexuality. That does not define who you are. Or that a life without personal sexual fulfillment is not worth living. This just isn't true. These are lies. Jesus, and I hope this doesn't come across as vulgar, I don't mean for it to be, Jesus never had sex. And Jesus had full identity and full purpose. So to claim that sexual pleasure is essential to your identity or purpose is to say that Jesus did not have full identity and purpose. But that's not true. Jesus did have full identity and purpose. And as servants of Jesus, we are not greater than our Master. So we could summarize the Christian sexual ethic and standard like this. Number one, everyone's a sexual sinner and is sexually tempted. There's one sense in that where we've got to be honest. We've got to learn to be more forgiving towards one another. We've got to learn to help each other no matter what the temptation is and be more gracious towards one another in that area while also being blunt and say what is right and what is wrong is wrong. Number two, sex outside of marriage is morally wrong. And third, marriage is between a man and a woman. That's the Christian sex ethic. We're all sexual sinners. We all get sexually tempted. Sex is for marriage. Marriage is between a man and a woman.